Good afternoon, and welcome to EV webinar number 2 presented by Lincoln Electric System. We're going to allow just a couple of minutes for our participants to join in, so we will start very shortly. Good afternoon, and welcome to EV webinar number 2, a review of the first 12 months of residential charging study results presented by Lincoln Electric System. I'm Mark Skolnick, Manager of Energy Services, and I'd like to thank you for sharing part of your day with us to learn about and discuss electric vehicles. Before developing this 4-part EV series, we sought input from a wide variety of customers. Feedback overwhelmingly indicated interest in learning results of a study we launched with more than 80 participants in late 2018. Today, we are going to take a deep dive into those results and consider what implications they may have on preparing for a plug-in future. Before I introduce our guest speakers, let's go over a few housekeeping details. You are in listen and view only mode, so we will basically be interacting using the Q&A box, which I'll show you how to use here in just a moment. We really encourage questions throughout the presentation. We've set aside time, plenty of time at the end of the presentation to get your questions and to have good interactive discussion. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing at les.com in the coming days. To use the Q&A feature, simply locate the function on your toolbar at the bottom of your screen, click on the Q&A box, and you will get this window that'll pop up. You just simply put in your question and hit send, and we will take a look at your question, and we'll hold it in the queue for our Q&A period. I'm pleased to present our speakers for today. Serving in his current position for the past 12 years, Scott Benson oversees a department responsible for planning future generation resource needs, including acquiring and administering renewable energy power purchase agreements and planning transmission system upgrades, in addition to serving those resources and the LES service area. Scott will also be introducing another guest speaker from Golden, Colorado, Eric Wood, who serves as a research engineer with NREL out in Golden, Colorado. LES partnered with NREL to assist in analyzing the study results. And with that, I'm pleased now to turn things over to Scott Benson.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Make sure everybody gets the screen set up right.
There we go.
Can you see the slide okay, Mark?
You bet, looks good.
All right, well, thank you for joining today, everybody. And before we really get into this current cutting edge study, I wanted to give you a blast from the past. That is an all-electric vehicle that LES was testing on these very streets of Lincoln back in 1980. It's amazing to think that we were testing these kinds of vehicles 4 decades ago. It's been a long time coming, but it sure seems like we're finally right on the verge of these taking a stronger foothold in the community and in the country in general. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff we've been doing in current, but this is something that LES has been looking at for a long time. So a little bit about how our study actually works. We partnered with a company called Fleet Karma, who does a lot of things with data analytics for electric vehicles. And Fleet Karma set up a website so our customers could go and enroll to be in the program. And we were targeting about 50 of these applicants. you know, given how many we had in the community, and we'll look at that here in a little bit, 50 was kind of a stretch, but we thought we wanted to get 50, we wanted to show a wide range of vehicles. Now, once people got approved for the program, we knew we supported their vehicle, basically. Fleet Karma shipped a hardware device directly out to them. This is it right here. You can see it also on the screen. Little thing goes in the ODB2 port, the diagnostic port. Pretty much all vehicles have them. And once they plug that in, it's cellular enabled. So it phoned home to Fleet Karma and let it know it was okay and up and running. Then we started collecting data every month. We download when people charge, where people they charge, because it's actually GPS enabled, and we know obviously how much energy they use when they're charging. We also know when they drive the vehicle, how long they drive the vehicle, how far they drive the vehicle, how much energy they consume when they drive the vehicle. We do not know where they drive the vehicle because the GPS functioning only works when they're charging. And finally, the participants, what they receive for all this, well, they got a $25 credit upon initial data collection. They're going to get another $25 at the end of the program when they return the little dongle. And then what's kind of neat is they have easy access to their own personal web portal where they can look at all of their data for their vehicle. Obviously, LES is seeing the data for all the vehicles, but it's anonymized. So we know who's in the study, we know all the vehicles, but we can't tie a vehicle to a specific participant. But the participants get to look at all their data firsthand. So I told you we were a little bit concerned that 50 vehicles might be a stretch, and this is why. Back in late 2018, when we launched this program, there were just over 300 all-electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles in our entire service territory. So getting 50 out of 300, that was quite a lot, actually. As it turned out, it wasn't that bad, and a lot of that goes to Mark. I know we have Jennifer Banger on the phone. They did a great job of going out and working with the community to get people signed up. Now, we did all the normal things to get people to enroll, and that's using les.com, using our social media, email, those kinds of things. We also sent out a press release. We recorded some short radio ads that played here locally. And then the big things where Mark and Jennifer and their team came in is one of the things that they did is they hosted a breakfast for some EV champions. Customers that we already knew in our service territory that drove either an all-electric or a plug-in hybrid vehicle, brought them in, told them what we wanted to do, showed them how the study was going to work, and number one, asked them if they'd sign up, and all of them were really gracious and said, you bet. And then the big thing was we said, can you go out and get other people to sign up because you know the other drivers better than we do. So we think we got a lot of people to sign up through that. And then the last thing we did is we made some windshield flyers, and you can see it zoomed in there on your screen. We gave these out to LES staff, to LES board members, and those EV champions that attended the breakfast. And the idea was anytime you were around town, you were in a parking garage, you were at a grocery store, you were out to eat, if you saw a plug-in vehicle in a parking lot, you went over there, slipped this under their windshield wiper, stuck it in their door frame, just so they would see it, kind of a grassroots movement. It all worked really well because I will tell you, you can see there on the left-hand side of your screen, that is tracking our applications for enrollment from when we first launched in August through the end of October of 2018. It took us 2 weeks to get over that 50. After 2 weeks, we were over 60, actually. Really great response. We ended up with 100. Because you have a little bit of people dropping out because we had a couple people sell their vehicle. We had an accident, so somebody replaced it. We had a couple vehicles that weren't supported because they were so new. But we ended up with 93 participants, people we collected data from over the year of 2019. So really great response. For all you folks on the call today who are people who are participating, we thank you so much. We couldn't have done this without you. We got a really great number. And if you look at that list, a really representative list for what you see driving around the streets of Lincoln. We're pretty heavy on Chevy Volts, Nissan Leafs, and then all the different Tesla models. But if you drive around town, those are the majority of what you see. So I think it's pretty representative. This is geographically how those 93 participants kind of shook out. If you look at that map view, you can see it's a really good distribution. For anybody who's not real familiar with Lincoln, I'm going to switch this to a satellite view. From a satellite image, it's pretty easy to make out the shape of the city area. And you can see this is a great distribution. Pretty much the entire service territory is represented by all these different participants. So not only did we get a great number, we got a great distribution geographically. Couldn't be happier about that. So real quick, I'm going to tell you some of the data points that we're collecting through the Fleet Karma method. So We've got anytime they charge, we know when they start charging and when they stop charging. All of this data is collected in 15-minute intervals, which works really well for us as an electric utility, because when we do a lot of our billing for large customers, that data is in 15-minute intervals. We know how much energy they consume when they're charging. We know how much energy they had in losses when they were charging, as in energy that didn't make it from the charger to their actual battery. And then we know their maximum charging that they hit us with during any 15-minute interval. Oh, hold on. We went the wrong way there. Okay. We also know the state of charge that they start at and the state of charge of their battery that they end each charging session. And then we know, because of that GPS feature, the geofence name, where that charging occurs. So that is either their home. Now, granted, we don't have an address because it's anonymized. We just know it happened at their home. We know if it happened at any one of the 13 public charging stations around town. They were all put in by name so we can tell which charging station was used. We know if they charged within the LES service territory, and then we know if they charged outside the LES service territory, but still within the state borders of Nebraska. And then finally, if they don't meet any of that, we know they charge somewhere outside the state of Nebraska. So that's how our GPS functions work here. On the trip data side, when they drive that vehicle, we know the starting date and time and the ending date of time of each trip. We know the distance traveled. We know the state of charge of their battery when they started, state of charge of their battery at the end. We know the fuel consumed in gallons if it's a plug-in hybrid. We know all the energy consumed from electricity. We also know the auxiliary load. So basically, the module looks at the load on the battery anytime the vehicle is not moving, averages that over the trip and says, okay, that was the average auxiliary load. Things like the air conditioning or heating or the radio. We know the total distance traveled with electricity, and then we know the total distance traveled period because we have the initial and ending odometer readings. Finally, we know an average ambient temperature throughout the trip. One of them that's really neat is we have a combined mile per gallon equivalent. So they take and look at the amount of energy in a gallon of gasoline, convert that to the amount of energy in a kWh of electricity, and come up with an equivalent miles per gallon so you can compare it to a similar gasoline-powered vehicle. And then we know the percentage of time that the vehicle sits idle. So you're sitting at a stop sign, sitting at a stoplight, sitting in your driveway, car is running, something's going on, but you're not actually moving. So that's all the data that we collect. There's actually more than that, but those are kind of the big hitter items. So we've gone through that. Let's get into the stuff that's the most interesting, which is actually seeing the results throughout 2019. Now, this is the chart we always like to lead off with. This shows the percentage of participants charging in any 15-minute interval of the day, and that's an average over the entire year of 2019, from January to December. And you can see that if you start in the middle of the day, around 11 or 12, it starts to go up. And we're pretty sure what we're seeing here is that as people go about their business during the day and they return home from either their errands or work, they're plugging their car in. And as you can see, the number of people charging just kind of goes up throughout the early afternoon, late afternoon, into the evening, and then it starts to come down overnight, and we start that again. This is an average over the whole year, but I'll tell you, if you pick out any one year, this shape pretty much is there all the time. Now, this is every day in 2019. This is what we see on weekdays. If you notice, same shape, it got a little bit higher. This is what we see for all the weekends in 2019. Very similar shape, but much more subdued on the peaks and the valleys. And why is that? Well, you know, during the week, a lot of us kind of work in the same hours, whether work or errands. A lot of that is condensed into the same period of the day. On the weekends, people probably have a much more diverse schedule, so it kind of loosens that up a little bit, moves the highs and valleys out a little bit. Now, that's on all the days. What we really care about here for LES as the electric utility is what's happening on our peak day. That one day, that 1 hour really, that determines how much we have to build the entire system to meet that peak load. So we looked at the average weekday in July of 2019, because for LES, most of our peak loads are set in the month of July, and they're set in the late afternoon, early evening, between the hours of 4 and 6 o'clock, when a lot of the industry is still running, but a lot of people have gone home and the air conditioning load is going up. And you can see here during those typical summer peak hours, we don't have the highest number of people charging, but it's a lot closer to the max than it is the minimum. there's a bunch of people, it looks like about 20% of folks towards the end of that period were charging their vehicles on average on a weekday in July. Now, the summer peak for us is usually our highest peak. It drives all of our construction and what we build to support the system. But we also took a look at the winter peak. The winter peak for us is typically in the month of January between the hours of 5 o'clock at night and 7 o'clock at night. And you can see here, same profile, but even higher. Now we're almost 30% of participants charging on an average weekday during that period. So what's the main takeaway from this? You know, without LES doing something to be involved, a lot of our drivers are charging their vehicles actively during our peak times, when it puts the most stress on the system and it's the most expensive to serve their power needs. So that's one of the things we've taken from this. Right now it doesn't matter, we don't have that many vehicles, but as we start to see the numbers grow, LES is probably going to have to do something to try to move people towards charging periods that are off of our peak, which is more desirable for LES and all of our customers. Now this actually shows the annual energy consumed over all of 2019, and this is all of the BEVs, or 100% electric vehicles. And we broke this down by make and model, but the real interesting thing is you look at the average. That's the average among all of our all-electric vehicle participants, just about 3,000 kilowatt hours per year. To give you a little bit of a frame of reference, that is approximately a quarter of an average Lincoln home. So think about that. If someone adds an all-electric vehicle, that's like adding the fourth of a home to LES's load. That's pretty significant when you get a number of cars. I also tell you, look there on the left-hand side when you look at all the different Tesla models, well, those are flirting with pretty close to half of an average home's load. It's about 40–45%. So when you put in those vehicles with the larger battery, much bigger impact. Here's what we see for plug-in hybrids, the different models we have there. And now you can, as you would expect, plug-in hybrid is getting a lot of its energy from gas, so it's down a ways. So we're just over 1,700 kilowatt hours per year. Another frame of reference, that's about a sixth of an average Lincoln home. So not as near as big as an all-electric, but still significant nonetheless. Now I mentioned we also know where this charging is occurring. So what you've got here is a chart for all of the charging sessions that happened in 2019. And you can see that 95% of those charging sessions were done within LES's service territory. So it was all here locally. We had 2% of them that were within the state of Nebraska, but outside the LES service area, so outside Lincoln. And then we had 3% which were completely outside Nebraska. People went on longer trips, charged their vehicle while they're away. What matters most to us, obviously, is that 95%, the bulk of the charging that was happening here in Lincoln. So if we zoom into that, this is what you see. 92% of that charging actually happened at the person's home, their residence. You had 1% was at all those public charging stations. So a lot of public charging stations in town. Actually, for a city the size of Lincoln, we have a lot of public charging infrastructure, not getting used much by the people here in our service territory. And then we had 7% that come across as other. You know, what's other? Well, if I drive across town and maybe I stop at Mark's house and I charge there. Well, Mark's house isn't put in the study, so even though it's at a home, it's not one of our homes per se that was geofenced, so it comes up as other. Another common one is if somebody has workplace charging that's not public, well, if they charge there, that's going to be recorded as other. But the main takeaway here is, for all the people that are living in Lincoln, they're pretty much charging here in town, and when they do that, they're charging at their home. So what's the big takeaway for LES there? It's probably not a good use of all of our customers' money to go and invest in charging infrastructure all over town. You know, you see a lot of larger metropolitan areas, and they talk about, hey, build the charging infrastructure, and people will adopt EVs and start to bring them in. Build it, and they will come. That might be true there because they have longer commutes and such, but for here, it doesn't look to be that way because the people aren't using that when they actually live in our service territory. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't put in some, and we've been pretty active working with our customers to put it around town in kind of more touristy areas, and that's important because you're going to support people that come in from out of town. But for the people who live here, most of them are charging at home. And then a little bit of that trip data. So we got two charts here. Again, this is an average overall of 2019. On the left-hand side, that is the average distance traveled per day in miles, and it's broken down by our plug-in hybrids and our all-electrics. And as you can see, they're both traveling about, on average, 20 miles per day. On the right-hand side is the average time driven per day in minutes. Again, you can see they've driven about 45 minutes. So people are only going about 20 miles, 45 minutes on average. Now they have days where they go a long ways, but this is average across every day of 2019. This is interesting. I'll show you. That's every day. This is what you see on the weekdays. A little bit higher, but not much different, right? Around 20 miles still and about 50 minutes per day. And this is what we see on the weekends. Still around 20 miles and about 40 minutes per day. Not that much change between weekday and weekends. So when you look at this, well, that kind of reinforces why are we seeing everybody charge at home? They're not putting too much pressure on these vehicles, their batteries, because they're just not putting typically on an average day that many miles or minutes on the battery. That's why everybody can comfortably in a city like Lincoln move around town, do their business all day, and be comfortable they can get back home and get charged up at night. So now we're going to open this up a little bit, and we're going to ask you some questions as we dig in a little deeper into this data. Mark's going to pop up some questions. You go ahead and answer, and then we'll see how it turns out. First question is, on average, how much better do you think the equivalent miles per gallon are for an all-electric vehicle as compared to a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle? So we've got 2 times better, 50% better, 25% better, or no difference.
And we're up to about a third who've responded, Scott, so we'll just wait another couple of seconds here.
Yeah, let's see what everybody's got. I'm curious to see what the results are here. Don't feel bad if you get it wrong. This is not graded. I didn't get most of these right the first time I looked at them either.
Just give another couple seconds here. All right, here we go. We'll share the results.
All right, so most people are saying 50% better. Then we get 2 times better, 25%. Few people saying no difference. All right, that's why I like to see a wide spread there. That means that we got a lot of people who are right and a lot of people who are wrong. That's a good place to be for a polling question. Okay, so let's dig into what we get. This is what we saw for all of our participants with an all-electric vehicle. And you can see that on average, over 2019, they averaged 113 miles per gallon. That was their equivalent when compared to a gasoline vehicle. Now you can see the spread there is actually from 75 up to 138, but our average was 113 for all electric vehicles. When we look at plug-in hybrids, we expect that to be lower. You can see it's 94, went from 68 to 126, but still 94, really good number. So when you look at that, on average, our all-electrics had a mile per gallon equivalent, which is about 1.25 times better than a plug-in hybrid. So the all-electrics were definitely better. Not as better as I thought they would have been. I expected a higher number. So you start to think through, well, why is that? Why are the plug-in hybrids doing so well that they're within spitting distance of the all-electric? So that brings us to the next question. On average, how much of the plug-in hybrid vehicle's mileage do you think was powered by electricity in our study? So we'll get the polling question popped up. So you can see we've separated here. You've got up to 25%, 25 to 50%, 50 to 75%, or 75 to 100%.
And we're up to about 50% response yet. We're still going up. Just a couple seconds here. All right.
Okay, so we got most of the people say 50 to 75%, 25 to 50 is pretty close. Actually, 75 to 100 is pretty close. And a few again with 0 to 25%. Okay, let's see what we get there then. We look at this one. The average is 58%. We went from 42% to 64%. Now this is, when we show you these averages by make and model, that's every participant that drives that type of a vehicle. And then the participant average is all of the plug-in hybrid vehicles. So when you look at this, there are people in here that have percentages that are much, much higher based on how they drive their vehicle. But on average, 58%. Well, that starts to show you why our plug-in hybrids are doing so well, because the majority of their travel is on that battery. Now, they're still using their gasoline engine, but it's the minority of their consumption from an energy standpoint. Okay, I got another one for you. On average, how often do you think people are charging their vehicle? So once per week, twice per week, every other day, or every day?
Still got votes coming in here. Okay.
The suspense is killing us, Mark. All right, here we go. So once per week, only one person thought that. We've got a few more twice per week. Most people are saying daily, and then we got a pretty good contingent that say every other day. So daily and every other day are the leaders. Let's see what we end up with here. This is our all-electric vehicles. Again, this is an average across 2019. This is the average number of days between charging sessions. You can see that over on the left-hand side, we got the Nissan Leafs. They're going about every third day. Then we start to trail down. We get towards the end, we do have some folks that are pretty close to every day, but on average, we're just over 2 days between charging sessions. So every other day, people are charging their vehicles. Plug-in hybrids, as you expect, lower, right? They don't have as big a battery, so they're trying to capitalize on it. So we end up starting with pretty close to 2 times per day, then we get down close to every day, and so our average, 1.5. So if you look at our plug-in hybrids and our all-electrics, they're pretty close in that every other day. That's about when we see people charging. The plug-in hybrids are trending more towards every day, a lot of them, but about every other day is a pretty good rule of thumb for around here. Okay, so now you got to think about these, because these, you'll strain your brain if you're not careful. We saved the hardest questions kind of here towards the end. So what month do you think sees the highest charging energy consumption? And when I say the highest energy consumption, I mean in terms of average daily charging energy consumption per vehicle. And then what month do you think sees the lowest charging energy consumption? And to make it easy on you, we grouped months in twos, all right? So if you couldn't decide between January or February, you can just go ahead and flock shoot and pick them both, all right? So we're looking for what month do you think sees the highest charging energy consumption? And then note there's a second question there. What month do you think sees the lowest charging energy consumption?
We've got about a third in.
All right, they probably, this one's tougher. Probably people need a little more time to think about it. That's okay.
They're coming in. Just give it another couple seconds here.
Okay, January and February, the highest, followed very closely by July and August, and everything else is way down the bottom. All right, I'm with you folks. That's what I would have expected as well for seeing the highest. And then we look at the lowest. The few times we've done this, I would tell you this always happens, that January and February, people call it for the highest. There's also quite a few people that will pull it out for the lowest. That's okay. And then we get March and April. March and April, pretty good bet. You kind of get those shoulder months. So that's good. That's a real good distribution. All right, let's see, Mark. Start to dig through. Now we got to do the second part of the question, correct, Mark?
Oh.
So we got a follow-up question for you here.
So you want, oops, excuse me. Let me pick the next question.
Fine, I'll read through. So it's, what month do you think sees the most vehicle usage in terms of average daily distance traveled? So we just asked you what month sees the most and the least charging energy consumption. Now we're going to ask you, what month do you think sees the most and the least travel in terms of miles driven? Okay, and we grouped the months for you before, just the same. And so you go through, now that you've answered charging energy consumption, think it through from a miles standpoint. most and least again.
About half in.
Okay, most mileage. We got people looking at July and August. That's the kind of the runaway winner there. And then least mileage, same way. Boy, you had a landslide, January through February. That's a big one. Okay, so Mark, let's go ahead and move on then, and we'll start to dig in the results. So as we started to look at this internally, the first thing we looked at was, okay, let's look at the average daily charging energy consumption per vehicle on a kilowatt-hour basis. And you can see as you look at that, we get a pretty good distribution, but what month is the highest? February, right? So February was the highest month. So the next thing we thought is, well, let's look at the average distance traveled, because maybe people are driving a lot in February, and that's what drives that. It turns out that's not right. And you can see that when you look at that, when are people driving? Actually, June and September were the biggest months. July and August weren't a bad bet. They're pretty high. October's really pretty high. But you look at February. You say, wow, February has the highest daily energy consumption from a charging standpoint, but people are driving the least amount of the whole year outside of January. The difference between January and February is not that big. So we said, okay, what's going on? Let's dig into this a little bit deeper. The next thing we plotted was the average vehicle efficiency. So the number of miles traveled per kilowatt of hour of energy consumed. And as you can see there, what's the worst month of the year? February. And we were kind of keying on February at this point because we were trying to figure out what was going on. So February's got the lowest vehicle efficiency. So we did one more chart. We said, you know, I wonder what the mean temperature is in all these months. So we looked at the average mean temperature, and look what we found. February, far and away the coldest month of the year. February being the coldest month of the year, well, what did that drive? Drive the worst efficiency of the year. And so what did that drive? It drove the highest charging energy consumption, even though people weren't driving their vehicle very much relative to the other months of the year. So really interesting thing. And when you think through this, you know, why is that? Well, it's cold outside, really cold in February here in Lincoln. The efficiency of the battery is just not that good at those temperatures. So what do you have to do to help that? Well, some of the energy from the car has to go towards heating the battery a little bit to try to get it back to optimum temperatures. And then you got participants driving around in the car. They don't want to be cold, so you have the heater going. You have seat heaters. You have steering wheel heaters, right? When people do regenerative braking, which kind of serves to charge your battery back up, that's not as efficient in cold temperatures. You don't get as much out of it. Even things like in February, you know, the nighttime is the longest time of the year, right? It's super dark, and so you're running your headlights a lot more than you are in the summer when it stays light until almost 9:30. All those things work towards having a low average vehicle efficiency, which means having the most charging energy consumption. So we thought that was a really neat thing to look at. Okay, so we got one more question for you. Oh, I jumped the gun. I should have showed you one more thing. If you take those green lines and you trend the average vehicle efficiency and the mean temperature, a lot of you probably picked this out without the line, but it's neat when you look at that. They follow each other almost perfectly throughout the year. Those colder temperatures have a big impact on that vehicle efficiency. Okay, so now we're going to go to the last polling question. This is a bonus question because it's kind of out in left field. But if you remember, I showed you that first electric vehicle that LES had tested way back in 1980. So on that chart I just showed you, for our all-electric vehicles, the monthly averages range from 1.7 miles per kilowatt hour to 3 miles per kilowatt hour from an average efficiency standpoint. So this vehicle right here back in 1980, what do you think it averaged from a standpoint of how many miles it could travel per kilowatt hour? We got data from 1980 to 1981. So we put it in ranges here for you. It could be up to half mile per kilowatt hour. Could be from 0.5 to 1 mile per kilowatt hour. Could be from 1 to 1.5 miles per kilowatt hour. Or it could be from 1.5 to 2 miles per kilowatt hour. I'm assuming there's a whole lot of guessing going on right now because I cannot believe people are educated to the point where they know what this would have been. But let's see. This is going to be kind of fun.
Got a few coming in.
All right, so we got most people between 0.5 and 1.0. Next is 0 to 0.5. So people are trending down on the lower end for this thing. All right, let's see. Now, in order to know the answer to this, we had to dig deep. What you see right here, this is a quarterly report put out in 1982 by the U.S. Department of Energy. LES was testing that vehicle as part of a DOE study with vehicles all over the country. In fact, Mark and I have read it. There was even one of the vehicles at Disney World. So they were getting a wide usage here. So if we go and look at that, there's a table in this report that lists the average miles per kilowatt hour, and what you see is it was actually from 1.3 to 1.4. This was a retrofitted Dodge Omni / Plymouth Horizon, and it really did pretty well, 1.3 to 1.4 miles per kilowatt hour. Now when you look at that, the cars we're looking at today, basically on average, twice that good. So still a real improvement from then to now, but actually it wasn't that bad. Now Mark and I have often wondered, could you really have driven this in the winter and not stranded yourself somewhere when the battery wasn't working well? But on average, it looked like it worked pretty good. So that's just kind of a neat blast from the past there. So we've done a lot of talking about 2019 because that's the data we've been looking at. And we're taking data all through 2020 also. And when we started this, we expected, hey, we're going to get a solid year of data in 2019. We're going to get a second year of data in 2020. And with 2 years of data, we'll have a really good data set. Well, 2019 worked out great. But we all know, unfortunately, what happened in 2020. The pandemic hit, right? COVID-19. And as you would expect, that's changed the data that we're collecting. So we're going to give you a real quick glimpse at what 2020 has looked like, at least the early part, compared to 2019. And on the screen right now, what you see is the number of vehicles by make and model that participated in April and May of 2019 and April and May of 2020. Now you can see there, there's 83 vehicles in 19, 80 in 20, so about the same. The number of vehicles by make and model changes a little bit, but it's pretty similar. So we feel like pretty confident we can compare these results apples to apples. First thing I'm showing you right here, this is back to that chart, the average number of vehicles charging in any 15-minute period over April and May, and its percentage of participants. The blue is what we saw in 2019. The orange is what we saw in 2020. Huge reduction, right? We got a lot more people actively charging their vehicles on average in 2019 than we do in 2020. In 2020, the highs and the lows, pretty flat, really, when you look at that. The profile's kind of the same, but the highs and lows have been scrunched together. Next thing I have to show you is this is that location data. So above is 2019. That's the breakdown of where the charging sessions happened in April and May of 2019. Below that, where did the charging sessions happen in April and May of 2020? When you look at this, they're basically exactly the same. The only thing that you even catches your eye is the other in 2020 is much higher. I can tell you, really, it wasn't much higher when you dig into the data. We think we've got a couple of people that might be charging at workplace charging. And so peers like throughout the pandemic, they still had to do a lot of their workplace charging. So their charging didn't change, but the total number of charging sessions, that went down. So their percentage of the pie just seemed to be a little bit bigger. But otherwise, really no difference. I would tell you the neatest thing from this is if we wouldn't have started this study in 2019, if we just would have started in 2020, and we looked at this data, I can guarantee you one of the conclusions we would have drawn is that, well, of course, most of the charging, 86%, is happening at home because people were home all the time because of the pandemic. But because we had such a good data set in 2019, we know that wasn't pandemic driven. During the pandemic, people did charge at home, but they were doing that before the pandemic all through 2019. So it was nice to have that 2019 base year to get a feel for that. And then finally, the miles driven and the time driven. On the left-hand side, you got that chart again, average distance traveled per day in miles. You can see plug-in hybrids cut by a third. They're down to, or cut by 2/3. They're down to about a third. All electrics, about half. If you look on the right-hand side, that's the average time driven per day. Plug-in hybrids, cut by about half. All electrics, close to half. I think we look at this, and what's one of the cool takeaways you can say? At the heart of the pandemic here in Lincoln, which was in that April-May timeframe, there's no doubt this is evidence. The social distancing that people were doing, kudos to them. They were doing a good job. People weren't out and about as much, and you can see it in the trip data, you can see it in the charging data. So really interesting stuff. So that is all the data we had to show you. Before I introduce Eric, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. And I want to thank a couple of our partners. They're mentioned there on the screen. The Nebraska Environmental Trust, and then the American Public Power Association, their DEED program. Both of those contributed grants to help support the program, and we couldn't have done it without them. We're really happy for their partnerships. And now I'm going to hand this off to Eric Wood of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Eric's work focuses on integrating real-world travel data into analysis of vehicle, infrastructure, and energy storage systems. Developer of NREL's battery lifetime and analysis simulation tool, which looks at system-level analysis of lithium-ion batteries, and their electric vehicle infrastructure projection tool, which helps to estimate how much electrical vehicle charging infrastructure is needed in a given area. Eric, the last thing I'm going to point out is thank you to you throughout this. All the data you've seen up till now, that was all analytics done in-house by LES. But I'll tell you, sometimes you see data and some of the stuff in the data, and it's weird, and you don't know if it's a problem or you just don't understand it correctly. And Eric and his team have been so helpful, because anytime we saw a weird quirk, it gave us somebody to reach out to and said, hey, are you seeing this same thing when you're looking at the data, and what's it mean to you? So Eric, thank you for all your help there. And Eric, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, and thanks for the overview of the data. It's certainly been an interesting study to participate in. Working at the National Renewable Lab in Golden, Colorado, provides a lot of interesting research opportunities. And working in the EV space kind of gives me the unique opportunity to work at the intersection of the transportation, automotive, and electric utility industries. And that's something I really value. So kind of talking with Scott about trying to provide some of that perspective, I wanted to talk about some of the work that goes on at NREL in this space of vehicle electrification, how it compares to some of what we've seen from this study in Lincoln. But before I do that, I just wanted to provide full disclosure. So, work out in Golden, Colorado, but I'm native Nebraskan out of North Platte originally. And so it's been kind of a great joy to be able to partner with Scott and the team in Lincoln on this study. Spent 4 years in undergrad at the University of Lincoln, and so it's been fun to see some of the data coming out of Lincoln. I think in general, we would say that the data coming out seems to be fairly consistent with what we've seen from other studies, particularly the home dominant charging behavior and that load shape that mirrors what we see from travel patterns in most parts of the US, as well as the charging frequency. I think that echoes what we've seen in other places, although there are some differences, and I will note that one of the motivations for me getting involved in this study is that there just actually aren't that many on-road electric vehicle evaluations to draw from for a lot of the work that we do at NREL and in the research community in general. And so the contribution that LES has made to the research community with this data, I think, has been tremendous. A lot of the data for electric vehicle on-road evaluations right now is coming out of California, and things like the cold weather performance of these vehicles is something that we're just not going to see out of some of the California data. So that's been a great thing to see emerge from the study. So kind of thinking about how this study contrasts, maybe from a national perspective and a forward-looking perspective. Within industry and also at the Department of Energy, there's a lot of work currently going into continue to bring down the cost of battery manufacturing. That's kind of where it all begins with these electric vehicles, is trying to make the batteries performant, long-lasting, and affordable for consumers. And so there's been a lot of progress made in the last decade, and I think the next decade is going to be a key one as well, to help make electric vehicles more competitive with the gasoline counterparts that you see in the market. These dropping battery costs have enabled automotive manufacturers to bring more model options online, which is a key thing to make available for consumers as we start to think about growing the market for electric vehicles to a broader base. So getting beyond just sedans and into larger electric vehicles, sport utility vehicles, pickup trucks eventually, are things that we're going to need to see in order for electrification of the transportation sector to continue progressing. We've also observed some shifts away from from PHEVs and towards long-range battery electric vehicles from auto manufacturers currently. That shift towards longer range vehicles has prompted the Department of Energy and others to invest R&D dollars into high power fast charging technology. And that technology is being developed and deployed actually today in the real world. You see in Tesla's supercharging network, they're going up, above 200 kilowatts for fast charging power. Electrify America is bringing stations online above the 300 kilowatt level. And so when you look at the legacy fast chargers, in the market today, where they're typically around the 50 kilowatt level. And so, the charging technology coming online is designed to help enable some of those, long distance electric road trips that may not have been possible with a slower charger or a more limited network and some of the early vehicle technology. And so, kind of broadening the use case for electric vehicles is one of the goals there. But certainly, the battery technology needs to keep up. I would say, a lot of these high power stations are coming online, but there may not necessarily be vehicles in the market today that can accept charge rates in that hundreds of kilowatt level. And so there's, continued and further technology development that we need to see. And then I think it was mentioned in the chat, I was following Scott's presentation, as the market continues to grow, I think we're going to need to pay more attention to people that may not have convenient access to residential charging. This could be people that live in apartment buildings and in urbanized areas, or even for people that park on the street in more residential and single family home neighborhoods. There's a large number of people nationally and certainly within Lincoln's territory that may not have convenient access to charging at home, and some of that higher power fast charging could help serve as a replacement for a home charger if you're able to use an electric vehicle in a similar way to where you would use a gasoline vehicle, where you could charge it maybe once a week at a high power fast charge station. That's technology that's being developed today by both industry and government research organizations. Thinking about some of those urbanized areas, there's been a lot of interest recently in trying to understand how we could electrify some of the new mobility options in the market today. So, over the last decade, companies like Uber and Lyft have kind of revolutionized transportation in urbanized areas and provided new options for consumers maybe that don't own a vehicle or don't want to use their vehicle all the time. And so we know today that companies like Uber and Lyft account for a pretty small share of the miles traveled by vehicles today. But on a per vehicle basis, we know that they accumulate a lot of miles. So there's some research that's been done that suggests electrifying one ride-hailing vehicle could be similar to electrifying 3 personal light-duty electric vehicles that are accumulating, as in the Lincoln study here, about 20 or 30 miles a day in some locations. And so there's tremendous benefits to electrifying those ride-hailing vehicles. But oftentimes the drivers of those vehicles might be those people that we were just talking about that may not have access to convenient overnight charging. And so thinking about what infrastructure may be necessary for those drivers is an important thing to think about. There's a California study that has pointed out that even though electric vehicles in Uber and Lyft service in California make up less than 1% of vehicles in the Uber and Lyft fleets, they've accounted for over 30% of the fast charging utilization in California. So, lack of access to residential charging can push those ride-hailing drivers to be heavy users of public charging infrastructure. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind as we think about electrification of this new mobility option, particularly as some of these companies, including Google and others, are pursuing automated driving technology for ride-hailing applications. Automated driving could potentially bring down the cost of these ride-hailing services and result in a lot more people using them on a more regular basis. Thinking about mobility more as a service and less as vehicle ownership as being necessary for mobility. Some of these kind of new concepts that we're investigating over here at NREL. That's all in the light duty space. There's also a lot of activity going on in the medium and heavy duty space, particularly transit electrification. Transit, though, has been an interesting thing to track through this quarantine and COVID period that we're in. it's certainly in a lot of regions taken a big hit as people are potentially traveling less, but also maybe uneasy about sharing shared spaces and shared surfaces. And so it's been interesting to see actually a big shift towards what we sometimes call micromobility. So people making use of traditional bikes or even electric bikes or electric scooters for getting around in urban areas. So that balance of micromobility and public transit is something that we're very interested to see how it evolves through this COVID period. And then, near and dear to Scott and team's heart, grid integration of these electric vehicles will continue to remain, at the forefront of this work. So transportation electrification potentially is one of the biggest opportunities for load growth in the electric system. But we want to make sure, and this is to a lot of Scott's points, that new load that's coming on is aligned with the power system in a way that it can be integrated seamlessly. And so trying to avoid lots of new load in those peak generation hours in the late afternoon and early evening is something that we want to pay attention to. And also, from a renewable energy perspective, which is a lot of the work that happens at NREL, we want to think about how charging of these vehicles could be aligned with low carbon intensity and low cost power generation on the electric side. So kind of a whirlwind there of research going on in the national lab system, but I just wanted to kind of put some context around the really detailed results that Scott offered. And again, offer thanks to Scott and LES for the great work that they've done with this study.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was a great overview, particularly from a national perspective. We've got a number of questions that have been posted, so let's get to those questions, and we'll just start as they came in. Dave asked if the Tesla charging stations were considered public charging stations in our study. Scott, you want to address that?
Yes, the Tesla station was considered a public charging station. That was one of them that was on there. That was one of the fast charger areas. We also had the Casey's installation out on West O Street.
Okay, our next question from Doug. Are most participants using level 1 or level 2 chargers at home?
So we don't exactly know what they're using, but we can tell from the data, for the most part, where they typically fit in. I don't know, we looked at what's the most, but I would guess level 2 is very well presented, and Mark knows this as well as I do. We can tell there's quite a few people, though, who are doing level 1, just plugging into their existing outlet, because you can tell based on the energy they're consuming. But there's no doubt it's probably a pretty even spread between those two.
We have Randall Smith with the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy joining us on this webinar today, and he had posted a comment, which is a good comment about public charging and it providing opportunity for those without access to home charging. About 40% of our residential customers do rent apartment spaces, and so that is definitely an underserved market right now. And I think that that's probably the next opportunity is working with property owners, multifamily property owners, to consider installing some infrastructure for those customers who do have plug-in vehicles. So I appreciate the comment from Randy on that. Art asks about the impact on greenhouse gases. Scott or Eric, you want to take perspective on that? I mean, the impact that plug-in vehicles have on carbon.
Well, there's no doubt it's a huge impact. You saw that miles per gallon equivalent, right? And what I wish I would have done as soon as you asked that question is we should have put a slide in here and actually nailed that down, but we did not. But we've looked at it in general, and obviously there is a definite reduction as opposed to driving an equivalent gasoline-powered vehicle. Eric, I don't know if you have some numbers to put to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that varies significantly around the country, and also, by time of day, depending on what that load shape looks like, you've got a different mix of generating assets online that are providing that electricity. So in some parts of the country today, so if you look on the West Coast, the carbon intensity of the grid in Washington State or California is very low, and so there can be huge GHG savings in certain parts of the U.S. In other parts, it's a more mixed message where there may not be huge GHG savings today, but the most interesting thing to me about electric vehicles is that they're one vehicle that can actually get cleaner the older it gets as the electric grid continues to evolve and bring on more renewable energy, potentially replacing coal with natural gas in some cases. And so there is potential for things to evolve, but the message nationally is somewhat mixed.
Next question was posted by Chris. Was there any additional data gained for ages, occupation of the participants in relation to the amount of driving per day? In other words, do we see significant difference in daily job commuter versus maybe an older demographic that may be retired?
No, there was not. Like I mentioned, the data was all anonymized, and we did not collect any data about the participants to try to do that. And a lot of that was when we were going out and canvassing the community to look for people to sign up. We kind of had a little bit of internal debate of how should we handle that, and we decided the best way to get people to participate and get us what we really need, which is the data, is to make it clean, anonymized, and not collect anything on the individuals. So no, we do not have any kind of that information.
Kim asks, how is miles per gallon equivalent calculated for battery electric vehicles?
So can I take control back, Mark?
You should be able to share your screen.
I'm going to bring that back up because we've actually got that in here, how Fleet Karma does that calculation. If I get on the right chart. Okay, so right there in the middle, that's that combined miles per gallon. So what they do is they convert the energy in a gallon of gas to kilowatt hours, and what you get there for a conversion factor that they use is 33.705 kilowatt hours per gallon. I looked it up. This used to be the number that the DOE and the EPA used. Since, I'm probably getting into things that Eric knows a lot more about than I do, but since then it looks like they've tweaked their number just a bit. It's not exactly 33.705, but it's darn close. But that's how they make the conversion, and so that's what our numbers are based on. Did I say all that correctly, Eric?
Yep, that was perfect, Scott.
Thanks, Scott. Here's a question for Eric from Dave Rich at NPPD. Does NREL have data on the fees charged for level 2 versus DC fast charging?
Yeah, certainly. So NREL maintains a database for the Department of Energy on all of the locations nationally for electric vehicle charging stations and as well as other alternative fuel vehicles. That website is the station locator on the Alternative Fuels Data Center. So if you Google for AFDC, you can find some of that information. The data center that we maintain, has given us the opportunity to connect with service providers for EV charging, including ChargePoint, EVgo, and others, to access some of their data on station attributes, locations, and also prices. And so we have looked at some of that pricing data. There's a lot of variability there, and I think a key thing to keep in mind is that the cost to own and operate these charging stations in many cases isn't directly reflected in the price to charge at the station. So for instance, some businesses may view the charging station as an amenity to lure customers to their location. Some employers may be offering it free of charge at the workplace as, again, an amenity to consumers. And so, certainly from a capital cost perspective, the fast charging stations do carry a lot higher initial cost. But we've also seen from some utilization data that those stations can be used on a much more regular basis and dispense a lot more energy than the level 2 stations can on a daily basis. And so there's potential for that utilization to distribute some of the capital cost. And so it's not always the case that the cost to own and operate a fast charge station is that much greater than a level 2 station. But again, in the data, there's a big distribution in price, and those prices might not be reflective of cost.
Got a question from Matthew, and Scott, you might take this. Have we considered using bidirectional charging to decrease the load during peak load times?
We've looked at it. Eric's going to, again, probably know more about this, but from what we've seen, that's not something that's really doesn't exist yet. It's not really commercially out there, a lot of people doing that. But we're keeping our eye on it because you've got a resource there that you might be able to make use of. But to us, it kind of goes in steps. The first is learning what the load pattern looks like and what kind of load you're talking about. That's where we're at right now. The next step might be, can we shift that load pattern to a shape that we're more comfortable with, that better supports our resource needs? And then once you can go through that, hopefully technology has come along far enough that you're hitting that third phase, and that's when you say, not only do I want to control when that person charges, I want to try and access and leverage their battery when it's available to me.
Here's a good question. Oh, go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to echo for Scott. Those were some great points. And I think from the research perspective, there's been a lot of great demonstrations that have been done on bidirectional charging, or what some people call vehicle to grid charging, using vehicles as an energy storage asset for the power system. The difficult part is trying to make the whole system pencil, right? So the economics of it are difficult to try and make sense of. As Scott described, there's a lot of value that electric vehicles can serve as a grid resource, just from what we might call V1G charging. So if you can find ways to manage the load from EV charging, you can accrue a lot of the benefits that you might see from V to G, just by managing that charging. And there's a lot of ways that charging can be managed, like Scott said, either through things that are relatively indirect, like time of use pricing, or other direct communication protocols that are being developed and attempted to commercialize right now. I think there'll still be a lot of research on managed charging and V2G. But right now, I think in the immediate future, those time of use rates are probably one of the better tools that utilities have currently.
Got a question here from Rhett, and I'm going to have Jennifer address this one. Is it true that every public high school in Lincoln is getting a charger installed? This individual, Rhett, saw one at Lincoln High. And also, when are the Russ's Super Saver chargers getting installed from the recent grant from the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy? I'm going to turn that over to Jennifer Bangert, an energy service specialist who focuses in on emerging technologies on my staff, to address that one.
Oh, yes, that is true. There will be 7 high schools that will have level 2 chargers that will be installed. Many of them, I believe, are already installed, but they will be done by the end of this year. UNL is actually also going to have 3 locations with level 2 chargers. There's another level 2 charger that will be installed at 70th and Van Dorn at his Auto Care. There's 4 total DC fast chargers that will be installed with the grant, one being at Innovation Campus. 2 of them will be at Russ's Market, one at 33rd and Highway 2, and there's one in Waverly, and the 3rd location is the Super Saver out in Fallbrook, and those will also have level 2 chargers with them as well. Thank you.
And yeah, and we want to thank the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy for the rebates they provided. LES also provided some financial assistance for those commercial customers to expand the public charging infrastructure in the city into areas that were certainly underserved. We got time for probably 2 or 3 more questions before we wrap up. Another question here from John, and I think John's a member of our study here. Are any of our local commercial heavy haulers, such as refuse, looking at the Volvo heavy electrics? I'm not sure we're aware of what's going on in the larger space. I know that there's development most certainly going on in larger vehicles, heavier duty trucks, and in a whole variety of other things. I don't know, Eric, if you have been following that. I would imagine you are to some degree, about heavy duty types of vehicles.
Yeah, no, the heavy duty vehicle market is a much different market than the light duty market. For one, it's much smaller, but obviously the vehicles are larger. And so one of the things that you notice when looking at vehicle electrification across light and heavy duty is that there's a lot of potential load that could come online from light duty electrification. But that load geographically could be relatively dispersed, right? So in Lincoln, if you think about a future with several thousand light duty electric vehicles, mostly charging at residential locations, that spatially that map would look fairly diverse. But if you think about heavy duty vehicles, if a fleet of UPS trucks or refuse haulers or tractor trailers is thinking about electrifying, that load system-wide might not be as significant as the light-duty load, but it could spatially be much more concentrated, which has a lot of impacts to, in general, utility distribution systems and what the cost of electrifying those heavy-duty fleets might look like. And so it's kind of a different problem from the light-duty one, but one where fleets are seeing lots of opportunities around the U.S.
That's a good point. LES has been working very closely with StarTran as they have brought in some passenger buses in the last few months. And those are more significant loads, as you could imagine. And so we worked almost a year in advance before they got delivery to talk about how to best serve them, when to best charge, that type of thing. A couple more questions here before we begin to wrap up. W. Don Nelson asks, are you able to tell how many of our home chargers are utilizing their car's timer function to draw energy off peak? And related to that, Chad submitted a question very similar. Has LES asked customers to program their charging timing, their charging time to a more beneficial time? Scott, do you want to address that?
Yes, so we have not asked people to program their cars to charge overnight per se, and that's because when we started this study, we wanted an unadulterated look at how people are charging their vehicles absent any input from the utility, and that's what we've gotten. So we didn't ask people to do it. Now, at the same time, we do have participants who you can tell had already pre-programmed their vehicles to only charge at certain periods, usually the wee hours of the morning, and we can pick that out in the data. You'll see it even in the averages. When we show those annual averages over the year, one or two cars with a set time each day, especially if they're like a Tesla, some with a larger battery, we can see that on the data because it comes through at the same time every day, and that little bump sticks out. So no, we did not ask people to change how their charging habits were made. That was if they weren't pre-programmed or they were, we just wanted to see the results. Going forward, that's something LAS have to look at, how we want to potentially influence that down the road.
And as we begin to wrap this up, I want to share a comment from Mark Broman. Mark is the executive director of the Nebraska Environmental Trust, and he indicated that in talking to one of the largest garbage haulers around town here 2 weeks ago, electric heavy-duty vehicles are too costly at this time, but they are running some compressed natural gas, and we'll add a few more in the future, so the economics will drive a lot of that. In mentioning the Nebraska Environmental Trust, I'd like to mention that last Friday, LES officially announced the launch of an EV rebate program made possible by a very generous grant from the Nebraska Environmental Trust of $120,000. That is going to allow LES to award rebates of $4,500 for the first-time purchase or lease of a new all-electric vehicle on or after September 1st, or $1,500 rebate for first-time purchases or leases of a new plug-in hybrid electric vehicle that occurs on or after September 1st. The rebates are going to be limited to LES residential customers only, one rebate per household. If there is a lease involved, it must be for at least 3 years. And if customer is purchasing an all-electric, they will also be required to install an internet-connected charging station at their home, which will allow LES to continue to get data on charging behaviors. So we're just tremendously excited about this, and we really want to thank the Nebraska Environmental Trust for their generosity in providing this opportunity. That will be awarded on a first-come, first-served basis. There'll be a web form on les.com on September 1st. So if after today you've got the passion and interest in actually getting a plug-in vehicle, plug-in hybrid, or an all-electric, this type of rebate may make things even that much easier for you to make that kind of decision. So this is the kickoff of a week-long series of virtual events as part of our Sustainable Living Festival. It's virtual. So in light of the pandemic, we've moved everything online, but we've got a whole variety of different activities offered each day this week. And we'll have another EV session come Friday, July 24th at noon. This is going to be aimed for folks who are considering the purchase of an electric vehicle. And we'll have a subject matter expert from EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, talk about all the different considerations folks ought to have as they consider a plug-in vehicle purchase. We also have a final EV webinar scheduled for Wednesday the 5th. We'll have another subject matter expert from EPRI join us talking about innovations in electric transportation. So make sure you go to les.com/EV to register for not only these EV webinars, but all the different activities we have planned for our virtual Sustainable Living Festival. This is the 10th year of the Sustainable Living Festival, and we're excited to be able to offer all of this online. Finally, we'd like you to complete a brief webinar survey that you'll be getting very soon. It helps us understand what you found valuable and other topics you'd like us to address in the future. I'd like to thank Scott Benson, my colleague here at LES, along with Eric Wood at NREL and Jennifer Bangard. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today as part of our EV webinar series. Have a great afternoon. We look forward to seeing you down the line. Take care.